we come to the card called Fortitude, or sometimes it's called Strength, which is a part of the path of power, and it relates mostly to the principle of evolution. And it's depicted by the card which shows a very gentle woman of grace, just holding a mouth closed on a lion. The image of controlling our baser animal instincts through the development of grace and wisdom and gentleness is indicated here. And that's a simple way of summarizing the meaning of the card. Simple though it might be, it's the most difficult of challenges, of course. And there's resonance here with the card of the chariot card, where being aware that the senses, the horses, the wild horses, were drawing us into temptation. And we needed a certain amount of self-discipline and inner strength to cope with that temptation. This card of the strength goes further in that direction. The animal instincts, the lion within us, is a very powerful beast. It can be meaningfully said that we humans live halfway between two distinctly different worlds, the worlds of the animals and their survival instincts being prominent, their kill or be killed attitude to life on the one hand, which is a part of what makes us who we are, and on the other hand the angels, who really don't have much to do with animal instincts at all. They're naive in a sense, they're light, and they see goodness. And we are both. We can be absolutely self-negating in our kindness in an angelic way, and live a life of service without any thoughts of why, because it's just the right thing to do. We can do that, some people. And others can get lost in the animal nature, where they know that they have to claim a position of power and defend it aggressively. And the human species walks between those two things. And in our civilized way, we understand that we have to contain our own animal nature, or there will be violence on the streets. And we're not doing very well at the moment. Certain countries far worse than other countries. It's not safe to live in some countries because of the animal violence in those countries. And it's not safe to walk downtown on a Friday night, even in civilized countries, for the same reason. We're not doing very well at really containing the beast. And yet, that may well be a success story, because we're not here to be angelic. We're here to tame the beast of our animal nature and be angelic. Not the same thing. The angels are having an easy time compared to us on this particular point. No, we're here to be aware that we do have within us this violent tendency. And if you think you haven't, well, look again. You have. It's a part of who we are. And in fact, if you can't find it, try to. Because this lust for life, this willingness to compete and overcome, is not to be forbidden. It's to be mastered. It's to be rendered tame. We have to tame the beast. But that doesn't mean to chain it. It means to gentle it, to use the tone of voice, the grace of being in order to tame the beast. And certain figures in history knew this. They had lions beside them. It's said, I think King Solomon did that. There's a story about this somewhere, that the real highly developed spiritual masters could tame wild animals, real ones. And this is because they have the ability to match the wildness in the power of an animal. Within their own eyes, they can do that. And yet, even though they're as vicious as a lion, they nevertheless behave with the gentleness of a young maiden. And this is the spiritual challenge for us. It's not to be good. It's to be good in the face of the temptation to be selfish. That's not the same thing. So those people who shun the material world and don't get into positions of power and the lust for success, well, they're not challenging themselves at the highest level. Those of us who really want to challenge have to get down and get dirty and get in there and just see what happens when they actually come up against the need for the lion within them, the vicious, violent lion, to win over an enemy, and see what happens then. And if we look at this from the highest perspective, we'll find that there's a need to evolve. Now, this second of the series of 3 tarot cards is evolution. The first is freedom. The second, evolution. The third, creativity in the Holy Trinity. So we're applying this to tarot cards, and we find ourselves in the set which began with the Wheel of Fortune. The freedom that we have. Everything is always changing, so we are free. And now evolution. What are we free to do? Well, we evolve by facing this test of strength. We have a test of strength with an enemy, and we win that test of strength, but not with our raw, hard power of violence and domination, not with that, but by the transmutation of hard power into soft power. Soft power is the power of charismatic influence, the ability that we can develop to control situations with the breath. It's a very high mystical attainment to be able to do that. And we're moving into a more advanced level of understanding life through the tarot now. We're more advanced beings if we've got through the challenge of the Wheel of Fortune. We've still managed to keep our head above water despite all of the things that are happening. We're still there. We're still successful. And it's because we're willing to change how we are and who we are. And this particular challenge here, the challenge of the Fortitude card, is to transmute your hard power of wealth and position and reputation and title and entitlement, hard power. Transmute that into soft power, where unrecognized, unnamed, with no resources whatever, nevertheless you dominate the situation through gentleness and tone of voice and wisdom and kindness. You take over situations using these soft powers. This is the challenge with this particular thing. I've mentioned that one of the things that I've done with my life, I've kind of turned it into a story that can be told through the tarot cards and other esoteric models. And when I look back and see if it works, if I can apply the mystery of the tarot to the hidden secrets within the events of my life, it actually checks out remarkably well. I'm going to write about this later. So when I was trying to understand what I needed to do within myself to transmute my power in life to a softer way of being, I came to understand the need for what is called ziker in Sufism. And I practiced ziker in a very robust and passionate way in order to clear myself of the tendency I had to be dominant and assertive and aggressive even. But at the age of 18, I kind of knew something that was remarkable, really. I mean, it must have been just intuition. I didn't have the reading or wisdom at that time to really understand it. But what I understood was this, that I wanted to drop out. I saw what society was, and I didn't like it. That wasn't for me. I knew that at 18. However, I saw some people, a bit later at university, I saw some people dropping out who had never been in. They'd never been in. They couldn't drop out of anything because they hadn't been in, but they said they were dropouts, I realized that it was necessary for me to make it in some way in society and then drop out, for that dropping out to be meaningful. And so I became an accountant and became a management consultant and had my own business, and I did rather well and had employees, 40 employees at one point. And I was doing okay. I had money and all that, cars. And then the time had come, and I left. I just walked away from it all and left it behind, knowing that the greater challenge, and this is the mystery of the Fortitude card, the greater challenge was over the self, not conquering the world, becoming rich and powerful, but however difficult that might be for most of us, nevertheless, there's a greater challenge to undertake, and that is to conquer yourself. And this is what spiritual practices are for, the conquering of self. We begin with breath, and we notice that we can't breathe properly. If you're breathing properly, then it's very slow, even. There's no hurry, there's no rush to breathe in or need to sigh the out-breath. It's just very slow, very controlled, very contained. And if it isn't, it's because of your emotional body being out of center, off center, out of whack. So we learn to breathe first, and then we add the names of God to that breath. So we might breathe in the word Allah, which was used for the name of God by Christians as well as Muslims a long time ago. That Allah word, that's the sound of breath. And you can add other words. La ilaha illallah is a version of prayer with sound, which is called ziker, which means remembrance. So I did this a lot. I learned how to speak these words and align it with my breath. So I'm breathing and speaking according to my breathing rhythm. My speaking rhythm matches, and that does something to you. It's other techniques very similar, like rebirthing and circular breath, like the didgeridoo. Various kind of breathing practices have the same mystery to them. So I'm not saying that zikr is the only way, but I found it. I came across it. And what happens when you do this kind of circular breath with consciousness of spiritual principles and perhaps even the name of God in your mind? What happens is quite extraordinary, more extraordinary than anything else. It brings up all of the shadowy animal nature within you, and it's real. You feel powerful like an animal, and yet this angelic consciousness is there soothing it, like, calm down, James. I know you feel like a bull, but you're a man, and you get that duality of consciousness happening, where there's a part of you that's animal in its power and a part of you that's angelic in its purity, and they're in contradistinction to each other. They're in juxtaposition. They see each other clearly, and neither is the more dominant when you get to that level of consciousness. Now, this differs from people that get lost in prayer. And monks, for example, they've gone a different route. They don't celebrate their animal nature. They discipline themselves so much that they contain it absolutely. That's what a monk's life is, which is what they're doing. That's fine. But that's not what I'm doing, and that's not what is the path of Sufism in my understanding. The path of Sufism is potentially very worldly indeed, and it calls upon every resource that you've got, including animal strength, in order to deal with danger. Sometimes you have to face down someone else's animal strength, and if you can't look them in the eye and match their power, you're lost. I've had this experience. I came across various difficult situations when I was travelling, and one or two of them were quite potentially harmful. On at least 3 occasions, I've looked into the eyes of a very violent man who wanted to harm me, and just held his glance and breathed quietly, softly. And the point is that unless you can hold the glance of the lion, you're going to lose. If you're really very advanced, you could tame the lion with the glance. And this is not fanciful. This is something that's recorded in the spiritual teachings that I'm part of. The ability that we have to face people down with the eyes is a major feature in life. And you can do it in different ways. You know, you can just show them that you can match their power, but you can then show them that you can affirm gentleness, and you can forgive everything that they've ever done to anyone. You can hold them in compassion. And that kind of scintillation, that oscillation between violent animal power and absolute angelic compassion, you can hold that in your glance at a certain level of consciousness, so that there it is. It's undecided yet whether you're going to be animal or angel. It's undecided and indistinguishable for most people. They just see that they can't get through you. It's in your eyes. They see that you're able to match them in terms of holding their pain unjudgmentally, so that they can cry into your loving heart, or stop them if they want to get physical with you, you know, because they can't break through your defenses. That's the mystery of this card, is having both of those two things: the gentleness of an angel and the compassion of an angel, and yet the strength of a lion, which is subject to your will, not the reverse. It's very much to do with self-discipline. Now, if this is what is next for you, you have to expect a great deal of passionate commitment to spiritual practice. This is not just for Sunday morning churchgoers. This is someone who spends a lot of time every day doing intense spiritual practice. It's a high level of attainment to be able to do this. Now, I've been focusing on the image of the lion because that's what the card has, as the symbol of violent power, because that's the lion's power. But the animal power that we have is less obviously to do with violence in most circumstances that we're involved in. We're more civilized than we were 100,000 years ago, of course, when that animal violence was more prevalent. But today it's more to do with sex, I would think, sexual charm. Most people use their sexuality to their personal advantage. In other words, we use that animal magnetism to gain influence over another. If somebody fancies us, then we take advantage from that, generally speaking. And even though it might be done in the nicest, gentlest possible way, nevertheless, it is the abuse of animal power to manipulate another. And anyone who's a flirt, or does something of that kind, or pretends to be interested when they're not, that's exactly what's happening there. And it takes a very high degree of moral fibre not to do that, not to take advantage of your sexual attractiveness in order to escape the need to develop the same kind of energy on a higher plane, the spiritual plane. And this is another little feature of life, which the spiritual teachers of the world, they seem to want us not to be like animals. So they teach sexual abstinence. It's a really big thing in the Catholic Church, of course, because priests aren't allowed to get married, and so on. And violence is just not on. But the pagans weren't like that. The pagans were totally into sex and violence, because those were the times. 2,000 years ago. It was a bit different. You had to get into the animal sort of nature when you're living outdoors, because it's real there. And we've moved indoors, moved into the cities where we don't really see lions very much. And we've moved away from the freedom of sexual expression that used to exist, in order to take care of families. And families are rooted in property, and that's probably quite a lot to do with it as well. So we've been actually trained for a long time by our spiritual teachers to deny sex and violence from our spirituality. And that's a loss. We have to include our sexuality and our animal violence within our spirituality if we're to be complete beings. Otherwise what? Otherwise, constantly we're judging that part of ourselves to be bad. My sexuality is bad. My animal violence is bad. Well, that's judgment. And judgmentalism is a bigger problem than all of the others put together. Because judgmentalism is to do with blame. And blame creates guilt. And guilt takes you away from authenticity. And authenticity is the answer. Truth is the answer. And so we've created for ourselves a world within which spirituality, a spiritually good person, is denying their animal nature. Well, that's not okay. And it denies us the right to tame it. You can't be advanced as a spiritual being to the level where you can tame your animal nature unless you allow it in the first place. And so we have to be sexual beings, be violent beings, and have it under control, so that we use our sexuality for spiritual purposes, for developing love, harmony, and beauty. And we use our violence to make it clear that violent people are not alone, and this is how they deal with their stuff. Now, dealing with your stuff is central to this question. Whether you are or are not dealing with your stuff is central to whether you're progressing spiritually. And those people who are just denying their stuff, no, that's not me, I haven't got that going on in me, lying to themselves, they're not dealing with it. They're not going to process it. It's not going to heal. It's just going to be carried forward throughout the whole of this life and on to the next. You've got to deal with your stuff, and we've all got stuff to deal with, and we don't have any chance of dealing with it unless we're honest about the existence of it. You can't heal something if you pretend it doesn't exist. So we're tested within this card to come to the edge of our animal nature and to look into the abyss and to see how lustful we are and how violent we are really as an individual and as a species. We're terrible people as a species. Look at what's going on all of the time in history and the news. We're terrible as a species. However, we still exist, and we're kind to people who need, and we offer care. And like humanitarian aid is being allowed into Gaza at the moment. That's an extraordinary statement of the blending of violence and compassion. We are so compassionate that we'll put aside considerations of war in order to allow compassion to be shown. So that's the dance that we're dancing, right on the edge between the angel and the animal. And if you deny either one, you've missed the point. The point is that we're walking on that straight line, that tight edge between being lost in the heavens and lost in the earth. We're walking that razor edge of having both in consciousness at any moment. Quite a challenge.